Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to a very special session today on the LOINC SNOMED Ontology. For those of you who have been at previous presentations about the LOINC Ontology, this one will be a little bit different. There is going to be some background and information on how we got to this point and the contents of the ontology itself. But today's conversation is really going to be about the ontology itself in an implementation context, assessing it for a fit for purpose value, and all of the lessons learned that have come out of the process as we continue to evolve and continue to build and grow this tool that we're hopeful will be of use to many communities. Now, today's focus being more on the implementation side of things, did just want to draw attention to all of the team members that had been contributing to this work very substantially over the course of the last 2 to 3 years. From the LOINC team, Marjorie Rollins, who's been the executive lead on the project since inception. As presenters today, we've got Stan Huff, we've got Isa Hafiza as well here in the room, if you don't mind waving, Isa, who will be available to talk to different aspects of the project as well. Stephen Wagers from a technical component, and April Lackey. So really core fixtures of the LOINC team. From the SNOMED team, we've got Jim Case up here. Yeah, we've got Jim Case up here. We've got Suzanne Santa Maria, who's right up here at the front as well. Farzaneh Ashrafi, who is not here physically, but maybe she's tuning in online. Peter Groves-Williams, Scott Campbell, who you all know, myself. And then we're really happy to have 2 special guests join our team today, Christian Reich and Asia Golazar from Odyssey. And so this demonstration today, or this, journey, if you will, is really a partnership from the LOINC and SNOMED teams to Odyssey as well, to start to see in a real world context, how can we start to apply this ontology. I will just say that if you type LOINC in the app and you arrived here, apparently it comes up as loincloth. So if you were expecting a different kind of session, I don't think we're going to be covering that aspect today. We've got 90 minutes here that takes us just to the end of the day and the beginning of the networking reception. What is it going to look like? Pretty much a bit of storytelling at the beginning, some intro and background around the ontology itself, and then really getting into exploring that real world use through an Odyssey bladder cancer management study, use case insights, so what we arrived at, and then really we're hoping that there's going to be an open forum discussion. And I think probably people would be okay if there were maybe some questions asked throughout. Yeah, let's make this as informal and interactive as it can be. There is a utility for those joining us online to put some questions or some comments in the chat. I'm very happy to monitor those, and I can raise them with the group as they come in. And then there is a standing mic over here. If you want to add something in or ask a question, please just feel free to come up and use it. We're going to be casual. Oh, there you go. So at this point, I'm going to pass things over to Dr. Jim Case, and he's going to kick us off.
So I'm just going to start things off by giving a little bit of history of the project and the history of the relationship between LOINC and SNOMED. I'm not sure if a lot of people recognize it, but the relationship between LOINC and SNOMED goes back all the way to the beginnings of SNOMED CT. The original evaluation procedures hierarchy model was based on the LOINC model when a very early version of LOINC was integrated into SNOMED at that time. There was no formal relationship at that point. It was a trial to see how these 2 systems could work together. And it wasn't until 2013 when we had the first formal agreement between Regenstrief and SNOMED. At that point, what we were trying to accomplish was a reduction in the duplication of work between observables in SNOMED and the observations and LOINC terms itself, and in order to essentially encourage people to adopt LOINC in the area of laboratory observables and other types of observables. There were some challenges with that because the agreement prevented SNOMED from adding new observables to the international release, which was a barrier to those countries, member countries of SNOMED, that weren't planning on using LOINC. And so over the years, as that agreement progressed, there was a desire between the two organizations to have a much more robust approach to the availability of observable entities and LOINC terms to the communities who wanted to use both. And how could we do that? How could we formulate an agreement between the two where there was not a duplication of effort, but actually a collaborative effort in order to transform the LOINC terminology into SNOMED without actually having to recreate LOINC in the international release. That agreement was first initiated in 2022, where we began the process that we're going to be talking about today, and the success of that agreement led to a renewal of the agreement in 2024, and the benefits of that you'll be able to see as we talk about this. So the goal here is to support the enhanced clinical functionality interoperability by having these principled relationships between the two, in which we have a formal approach to the representation of observable entities in both of the terminologies without actually duplicating the effort, as I mentioned before. And it provides this support for users who don't want to use LOINC and those that do want to use LOINC, but then also provides a mechanism so those things can be transparently exchanged and converted between the two. So the overall view of how we did this was that to create an extension of LOINC using SNOMED CT's ontological framework. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the LOINC, with the SNOMED observation entity model, which is a little bit more of a robust model than the LOINC 6-axis model. But through the mapping procedures that we've undertaken, we have been enabled to transform the LOINC representation into an equivalent SNOMED representation through automated tooling. So the content that goes into the LOINC extension is LOINC. It's a totally equivalent representation. We're not simply taking LOINC and remodeling it. We are actually creating a semantically equivalent representation between the two. This allows us then to distribute the LOINC content to both LOINC and SNOMED users. The extension is actually owned by Regenstrief, so it's a Regenstrief product, and it's distributed through Regenstrief. This makes it easier for implementers because we have a unified approach then to representing observables and LOINC content in a way that's easily transformed between the two. And so it provides a single solution regardless of whether you want to use LOINC or whether you want to use SNOMED in terms of the representation of observables. The first release came out in March of 2025. We were actually quite pleased to be able, after the beginning of this endeavor, to have as many as 35,000 concepts in the very first release, which at that time was about 50% of the laboratory observables in LOINC. It was primarily focused on quantitative laboratory tests with the focus on the 200 most used labs. We also wanted to have the opportunity to represent panels. The way that we did this is we added panel names to the terminology without trying to model them, but we wanted to ensure that everything that was represented in a panel in LOINC, in terms of the observables that were attached to the LOINC panel, were also represented in the LOINC extension. So we ensured that all those items were in the release before we actually added the panel name as well. So the examples are on the screen there about the types of codes that were included in the first version of the terminology. Version 2 was released in September this year. We've increased it to over 41,000 concepts. Again, we're focusing on the most widely used terms from LOINC, and we're getting pretty good in terms of the coverage. At this point, we've got 88 of the top 100, 1,533 of the top 2,000, 1,115 of the top 20,000. Our goal is to have the total 20,000 top terms available in the next release or two. We've also been able to add annotations for discouraged LOINC terms. This is a feature of LOINC where they include terms as being active but discouraged. And this is a new addition to the to the LOINC extension that allows people to view the status of these active terms. And something that is new both for the second release and also for LOINC in general is the addition of about 2,500 orderable groupers. These groupers, I'm going to let Stan talk about more of those in detail, but this provides a less granular approach to allow clinicians to order without having to know all of the details about the individual LOINC terms that could possibly be used to result those. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Stan to give more detail about the content.
Thanks, Jim. I can never participate in this without expressing my pleasure and gratitude and honor to work with such a great group of people. I mean, I truly love this collaborative project and the people that we work with on it. They know things I don't know, and they teach me things, and we get a lot done. And I love the collaboration. I appreciate it. But to say a little more, there was a need basically that was expressed, actually two needs. One need was that people said of the new LOINC ontology that it was flat. I mean, you come in and you do observable entity or observable lab entity, and you see, 10,000, whatever the limit is for a screen, you see 10,000 things. So one thing was to say, are there logical groupers that would make that kind of more browsable and give it a little more texture, if you will, in a sense. The other thing was that we hadn't focused on, and this came much more from international users than US users, to say, and it actually corresponded more to SNOMED tradition in a sense too, in making observables that were more general and more appropriate for ordering. LOINC traditionally has focused much more energy on result codes than on ordering, and the fact that we had some, we have some panels, and there were some LOINC codes that could be used for ordering was great, but we didn't work and really think hard about how we could make ordering better. And this was an attempt to do that. And we went out and looked at commercial lab catalogs and other things and found that most of the things that you could order from commercial laboratories or anybody's lab catalog said things like, serum sodium measurement or serum glucose measurement or urine glucose measurement. They didn't specify all of the other additional information about those items. And so this was an attempt to make those kind of similar codes so that they had standard codes. And this is maybe getting a little ahead of the game. After we announced this and talked about it at the LOINC conference a couple of weeks ago, people from the commercial lab said, this is great. I mean, we're getting hundreds of local codes of ordering codes that come to us, and we want a standard so we can map those to a common data element and then use that to guide the processes by which we then execute the actual analysis in the lab. So that's what we were trying to do. And this, as Jim noted, it's a creation of more generic concepts in an entirely new way, and it's basically a new LOINC policy, because we've explicitly not done this in the past. I mean, we knew it could be done, and we didn't do it because we were worried, and that's why I'm saying a caution here. We're still worried that it could be misused, but I don't think we want the worry of misuse to get in the way of people who want to use it properly, and so we want to emphasize the correct use of the codes and have tutorials and examples and implementations that show the proper use. But the new codes then are in a particular class within LOINC called laborders.ontology, which is meant to kind of key people to the fact that they're meant for ordering only, and they're also meant to help organize the ontology. And serve that dual purpose. So what we actually did then is and I'd go back here for a second, the way we did it is basically looked at LOINC, looked at the component part of LOINC and the system or kind of specimen, and then instead of saying a particular property like mass concentration or substance concentration or fraction, whatever, we just said measurement. And measurement was meant to subsume all of those things that were measurements, if you will, that would subsume mass concentration, mass fractions, substance fractions, all of those things are about, I don't know, 20 kinds of properties that are subsumed under measurement now in the ontology. So what that says then, how we would expect these concepts to be used is shown on the left-hand side of this screen. It just says glucose measurement in serum or plasma. That would be a perfectly reasonable order. And then what could come back from that order would be a glucose that was a mass concentration, or it could be a glucose that's a molar concentration based on the preference of the people who are ordering the test, or the region that's using that. And the thing that we don't want to have happen is we don't want that code to come back as the result code in a result, because it's not sufficiently specified to say what was really done, and the clinicians really need to know what was done, that this was a point in time measurement, et cetera, all of that stuff that's really part of the full definition of the LOINC code. So, yeah, Susan, you want to ask a question? I'm so surprised, but go, okay.
Hi, I'm Susan Matney from the United States. Go back to your one slide. Is there a relationship in the ontology between the order and the valid results?
Yes,
And what is that?
Yeah, if you go in there, it's subsumed. It's subsumed because the measurement concept subsumes the properties of mass volume and substance volume, and so it classifies. These guys classify underneath the more generic.
So the order has a relationship to the valid results, and what is that relationship's name?
It's ISA.
Oh.
I mean.
It's in the main. It's not a new. It's kind of they're together.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's not separate.
No, it's not separate.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. Good question. Thanks. Concluding, kind of talking about the new order-only concepts, talking about what we're planning to do next. As Jim mentioned, we want to really try and complete at least the top 20,000 lab items. And I would, sometimes, I mean, you say things like we got the top 88 out of 100. And we've got, 14,000 out of 20,000. If you look at the volume of lab tests that exist in the world, those things are covering more than 90% of the data. And when you get to the 14,000 that we have now, it's probably covering somewhere in the neighborhood of 97% of real data that's flowing in the world. So it covers a lot more than you might, you think we're only 80% done. Well, in terms of lab data in the real world, we're like 98% done, but there's more to do. We want to focus on completing it, and we've specifically looked and been working on coagulation studies and challenge tests, and Scott has specifically also been working on cell markers and a bunch of other things that will add a lot more codes to here and make it complete. All of these things, but I have to say, looking at the coagulation things, and making sure that the way that we've modeled things in LOINC correspond to the correct semantic meaning in SNOMED causes us to do some tweaking sometimes, and sometimes the other way. There are things that haven't been, there's something missing in SNOMED, but with the coag stuff, it's been a bit, coag stuff is hard. You got to, and it's specialized. So we're glad that we had Scott to help us out and do that. Kind of at a more infrastructure level, one of the things that we want to do soon is figure out how we represent the LOINC answer lists as value sets in SNOMED, so that you see the connection between a coded concept in SNOMED and the allowed values for that concept in the real world. And so a lot of those exist in LOINC, and there are like 2 or 3 or 4 ways that it can be done, and we need to just talk through and see how we want to do that. And if John Snyder is here, he would say, and we've got to mainly so we can say what the binding strength is. It's a real important point for him. So we're working on that, and then we want to start looking at high priority clinical observations, which typically means things that are done as direct measurements on the patient, blood pressures, heart rates, physical findings, all of that kind of stuff. But we're just getting started on that, so don't think that's going to be all done too quick. So that's my quick summary of kind of what we're looking for ahead. Did I miss anything? Any questions about that? All right. Then Jim and I will step down and let Asier and Christian come up and talk about OMOP and the experiment.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having us. So before I start, I have to say that this is extremely important for us on behalf of Odyssey to be a part of this collaboration, being able to talk about the use cases, how we use the data and try to identify, look and find the problems and together identify the solutions. So my name is, I had to do it before, Asier Golazar. I'm here with Christian Reich. We are from Odyssey, what stands for Observational Health, Data Science, and Informatics. We're also together at a consulting company called Nemesis Health. Before I start talking about the use case, I will tell you a little bit about Odyssey. And I'm sure there are a lot of people who know about it. Actually, how many of you guys know about Odyssey? Great, I don't need to do a lot. But I'll tell you a little bit, just for all of us to be on the same page. Before I do that, at any point, if you want to really listen to this entire story, how this thing came through, he's the one to go to. He knows everything. He's one of the originals. So, as I said, Odyssey stands for Observational Health, Data Science, and Informatics. It's an open source community, an open source and open science community. So there are people who are from different backgrounds, from bioinformatics, epidemiology, clinic, medicine, mathematics, you name it, everyone that has one shared value to improve human lives through using observational research, generating evidence. So in general, we call it a global success. This is the map of all the locations and all the countries that we have representation in Odyssey. Approximately around 4,700 collaborators. They're coming from 88 different countries, 21 different time zones, and 6 continents. Together, we're one community. The goal of the community is to develop standards. So if you can actually go work through the standards from the time from where the data comes from to through the entire process of evidence generation, you can ensure that you'd be able to have a large-scale, impactful evidence that can be used. So people work on open standards. So that's what OMOP Common Data Model is about, and standardized vocabularies, and that's where we get to engage with SNOMED and LOINC and other societies. There are individuals who are working in open source development and tools that would help either through the standardization, doing analytics and reporting, and all of that is to generate clinical evidence and the evidence that can be used. There's collaboration and scholarship. This is just the total number of the publications that the community has put together so far, more than 600 peer-reviewed publications. As you can see, there's publications are not one author, one institutions. We have sometimes over 180 authors from different institutions. We work together to make it happen. And this is basically our life. What makes it a success? We believe there are standards or there's secret sauce for that. Importantly, we work in an open source and open science community. We work together, we help together, and we learn from each other and improve. It's one community. And we use the value, or we are very fortunate to use standards and use standardization across the entire process that will ensure reproducibility and scale. Those are what we work with. So what does Christian and I do? What do both of us do? Most of our time is oncology. So we've been working on Odyssey for a while, and we're very, very interested in using the standards and the approach to generate large-scale oncology research. So what does that mean? Using the observational data that are being generated usually at the point of care or for any other purposes to answer clinically relevant questions. And that's where we come and have a discussion with Scott. That's one of the use cases that I'm going to talk about. Generally, it's very important to know that how are patients being treated? Are they really benefiting from the treatment? Who's not being treated? What do we know about the patients that are actually in the real world, not in the clinical trials? And when it comes to cancer, we know that around 92-93% of cancer patients are not involved in the clinical trials. So the majority of the patients we actually don't know anything about. That's what we want to learn. So generally speaking, what happens is the process is that there are patients that require a treatment. There is a need. And there are clinical entities or bodies that are responsible to come up with recommendations to treat these patients. Those are called clinical guideline development groups. The simplified version of the process is that usually a clinical study is identified or a series of clinical studies that seem to be relevant for the question. And they're assessed in terms of eligibility. The evidence is gathered, incorporated into the guideline. The guideline is disseminated for practice. What's happening is the feedback loop from the recommendation of the treatment recommendation to what happens to the patients are generally missing in clinical guidelines. That comes from real-world patients and real-world experiences. There is a potential to add a lot of evidence from this kind of data. Like what? Do these guidelines really matter? There is a new treatment recommendation. There is a new arm in the guideline tree. Do we actually have patients that fit these criteria and they should be evaluated? Are guidelines really being adhered to? Guideline has very, very long list of things that needs to be done on specific types of patients. Are they really being adhered to in clinical practice, and if not, why? Is there a difference or impact on lack of adherence and adherence on the outcomes? We can look into generalizability. Do we see what we're supposed to see? The clinical trials are saying that there is, for example, twice increase in the effect of a treatment compared to the comparator. Do we see the same thing? And also identifying the unmet need. So that's where our use case comes from, and specifically for these collaboration. So very specifically, we want to look into, we've been looking and working on the EAU guideline for muscle-invasive metastatic bladder cancer. This is the 2024 version of the guideline. 2025 is there, but there hasn't been much change. So very specifically, focusing on the treatment of metastatic bladder cancer. So these are the patients with a cancer, urothelial carcinoma in the bladder, with a metastasis, distant metastases. So as you can see, just summarizing and dissecting all the components of the guideline and putting it into a decision tree, this is a simplified version of what we see. There are decisions to be made at each point And after that, there is eligibility, there is the path for moving forward to one or the other way, right? So first, for example, whether patients have ever received treatment or not, and then eligibility criteria. Can they receive combination therapy? So these are usually used to be platinum combination, either cisplatin or carboplatin, with the addition or the new addition to the guideline, and enfortumab is also plus pembrolizumab. That's another combination. If they are eligible for enfortumab? If not, cisplatin, and at the end, there are treatment nodes. So, yeah. So, for example, to be able to receive enfortumab plus pembro, a patient should go through this decision tree. So, haven't been treated or haven't been treated in the past month, combination for eligible to therapy and combination for enfortumab. Yes, give enfortumab plus pembro to the patient. That is for all of them. So, for us, there is an opportunity to look at the adherence and relevance of the guideline generalizability. If we want to do that, we have to look at each of these decision notes and what it contains. Very simply, I'm not going to read that, but there's a lot going on. Is there malignancy in the bladder, your urothelial histology? There is metastases. And then as you go down, you start looking at, is the glomerular filtration rate above 50 per milliliter per minute or not? Do we see here controlled diabetes, controlled or not, which is later on further described as hemoglobin A1C above or below certain limits? Organ function test that is summarized here, which is looking into liver, hematologic function, and also kidney in terms of looking at the labs to see whether they are working, whether the kidney is healthy enough for a patient to receive cisplatin or not, same with liver and so on. So, and then here we look at like specific rate for PD-L1. So just if you want to summarize it, if we want to study just the eligibility of the patient population in the real world, we need these lab results. If we have them with the units, then we can create these complex operation or algorithm to identify eligible patients. That was our first step. Can we do that, and where do we start? We started talking with Scott, and Scott is going to tell us what he found in terms of the assessment. So, please.
That was really good, Asiya. I always love when you can take something very complex and make it very, very simple. So this was really fun. So that's a very complex study, and lots of moving features. What we wanted to look at in particular is who's using the LOINC Ontology, or what is its fitness for purpose today? Why, in other words, why did we do all this work for the last 2 or 3 years, and how would we use it? So taking this this study, and it was great that Asiya and Christian were able to do it, had data ready that we could do a comparison. We wanted to really compare what does research in a common data model environment type of study look like before and after the application of the LOINC Ontology. So basically, the objective, and this was a quick study, so this was not an NIH-funded, multi-year, multi-arm study. This was a quick review of about 20 hospitals, I think it was 20 institutions, yeah, for a period of time. How are things encoded? So how can we apply the LOINC Ontology? Can we give our user community something to touch, right? It's been pretty esoteric to this point in time. So how do we actually bring this into application? How does it work? Why does it matter? Let's give an example. Let's talk about things we can learn, and where are the gaps still in our effort. So the use case was the bladder cancer use case and adherence to care guidelines. And what we wanted to do is normalize this on an information model so we can isolate, if you would, terminology. So we're going to do this in the Odyssey Common Data Model. It's an international application, so it's not just 1 or 2 institutions. So we can look at this broadly. And how is the data quality and fitness? Does the LOINC Ontology actually help? And in essence, what can the CDWs do when it involves laboratory data, in essence, to be almost in silico type clinical trial environments or pre-test environments. So we don't really need to go through all this. ASIA did an awesome job. Basically, here's what I did. So we presented this project. And, you know, as you can imagine, people who travel all over the world, an anxious person who likes to get to work right away. So I said, well, while I'm waiting to hear back from Christian and Asier on what the guidelines were that they use, EAU, right? I said, I'm going to go to the NCCN guidelines, so a North American Cancer Guideline protocol, and I reviewed the entire set of protocols for anything to do with laboratory. What laboratory tests are used in the context of monitoring, maintaining, and serving patients with any form of bladder cancer. And basically, what it boils down to is hepatic function, renal function, CBCs, so your blood profiles, and some special tests, hemoglobin A1C and folic acid. Little different, so I'm looking at what the guidelines were in general, not necessarily all the other laboratory tests that are required to determine is this patient actually eligible then for a particular thing. So you'll see a couple divergent things, but doesn't affect what we did. So for those of you who may or may not know how these common data models get their data, we start with the clinical information system, whether it's your LIS, your electronic health record. And that's the original data. Now the question is, how is it encoded? Is it represented in some local terminology, a vendor-specific terminology? Was it encoded, and then to what level of is it encoded in an international data standard? If your LIS is separate from your EHR, then we actually continue on to the next part, which is your EHR, because your LIS is generating local coded data usually, sending it to the electronic health record where it's aggregated, and who's coding there. Finally, and we extract that data in some way, shape, or form from our electronic health record, transform it to the common data model, but this is where data wranglers, unfortunately or fortunately, come into play. Many of these data are not encoded or represented uniformly, and there's an application of a SME or a set of SMEs or supposed SMEs who try then to apply international standards to the local data elements and then put them into a conformant model for CDM. Okay, that's a site. Now, what's beautiful about places like Odyssey is that you may have multiple sites. Here I just represent 3. Site A takes their data, curates it, puts it into a site-based OMOP model, right? Site B does the same, Site C does the same. And then an aggregate study is possible. So this is where ASIA and Christian come in, and they say, we are looking for a study that's looking at these data, and they will create an exhaustive list or a specific list of the data elements they would like participating sites to provide, and then it can be aggregated in a single site, all maintaining patient privacy. This is all de-identified. But now we've normalized both on terminologies and we've normalized on common data models or a data model. So theoretically, it provides us a stable place that at least we know the controlled environment in which we're reviewing our data and we can do our studies. Okay. So, and actually just explain that, so we don't need to do that. Good. So what did we want to do? Well, I wanted to compare what Odyssey does currently, a typical Odyssey researcher would do, and what would laboratory data look like, or how would the requests be developed differently by applying the LOINC ontology. And then let's overlap. Let's see where the differences were, essentially. What's the Venn diagram? So, as noted, in the European Society of, or Association of Urology, the bloodborne tests that overlapped, if you would, included 880 coded elements that were requested for ALT, liver enzyme, ANC, so a blood measure, APPT, ASC, and you can see all of those. So there were 880 different codes for those, about 10 tests, right? This is distributed across the research network, data is pulled and sent. And then the objective here is, was the data as submitted, returned by the participants, fit to even be used, okay? Criteria would be units of measure provided, or we'll get to that. Ranges of values was the median, the mean, and the standard deviation something that's reasonable for this type of test? And how does it compare, if you would, to textbook values? So here's a sample set, and I thought this was fascinating. This comes in, sorry for the wraparound, but that's just the way it is. This would just be for a sample set of ALT, so a liver enzyme, what was returned to Odyssey. We have LOINC parts, 1, 2, 3, 4 LOINC parts, something that's never supposed to be implemented in a system, but has been implemented in a system. Some LOINC terms, you also see some SNOMED concepts. Remember, there are UK institutions in this, so LOINC's not used in the UK. SNOMED is great. We get all of this put together, but you see a bunch of variation. Conversely, with the LOINC ontology, I went back and said, well, what are in hepatic function tests, renal panels, and the like? What are those tests, and how would they be configured, if you would, using our ontology? So what properties are we measuring of the components, if you would? Different approaches to do so. For example, in Australasia, blood is often used, whole blood is used often for the substance being analyzed, whereas in the US, in other nations, it might be platelet-poor plasma, but we're measuring the same thing, same analyte, so how do we handle multiple specimen types and so forth? So I built queries, in essence, for every one of these tests. Now, remember, I use the NCCN guidelines, so it included panels, so a little bit different, but philosophically the same. So what I did is I went and built ECL queries for each and every one of these tests and panels. This is just an example of an ALT query. Would return something like this, so execute it in the browser, and this is my return. And so in this, in fact, I got the logical equivalent SNOMED, LOINC ontology, concept IDs, and the LOINC terms. So this would be, if you would, if I were sending this out, or Christian and Asier were sending this out using the LOINC ontologies, these would be the 8 and only 8 concepts that would have been sent out for an inclusion criteria. And you notice I even I have one, there's a couple that probably will never be used. You know, ALT in serum or plasma, no addition of a particular chemical. I don't know. Well, what was nice is I did this for entire panels. So I could take, here's the code for an entire hepatic function test, execute. Here's every logical, testable, reportable laboratory test result that could possibly be included in a hepatic function test, a renal function panel, and several of the others. So it was actually fascinating to watch this happen, and it took just seconds to execute. Okay, and so, and it accommodates different variations, different methods, and so forth. Just for scientific integrity, there are some differences, so, but that you should know. Odyssey includes all standards that could possibly be used, not just LOINC. So SNOMED could be used, NACER, CPT, ICD-10, word strings. So lots of different ways, a very large net that CA and Christian have to cast. In this case, we're only looking at LOINC encoded data. So we're going to isolate what we're looking at just to LOINC for this point in time. Odyssey was selective and also included coag tests, which I did not include because those are tests that are required really for, okay, the patient has all the right things, that they should be going down a certain pathway, but now there's a stop point. Is the patient able to tolerate this treatment? So there were some things I didn't include. I did include panels and so forth. And so you can see what we ultimately did look at. So ALT, ANC, so absolute neutrophil count, AST, creatinine, direct and indirect, total bili, glomerular function, A1C, and total hemoglobin. So what do we find? And this is the fun slide. Basically, what we found, and I'll start with, yeah, we didn't learn anything yet. So ALT, for example, Odyssey included, just in LOINC, 16 different target concepts that could be potentially included. Our ontology count, and 5, just so you know, of the 16 candidate terms, 5 were returned with data. Okay, so we know that 5 of the 16 are being used somewhere. In the LOINC ontology count, I came up with 7 items, and we had 100% overlap. So of the 7 items I returned, all 5 that had data were represented, if you would. So that was great. We go down to absolute neutrophil count, and we have a little different story. Odyssey, in the broadest scope, 40 potential target candidate codes to include, 20 of which had data returned. The LOINC ontology count only said 12 items should be considered, and we had an intersection of only 6. So we had an overlap of only 30%. Some of the differences were specimen type. So in the LOINC, not in the LOINC, in the Odyssey, using strings to say, send me, A and C data, included data that was in body fluid. Well, we're really looking at blood tests for any of these, so not body fluid. So those would be not allowed. One of the LOINC, and not LOINC term, well, actually this one was a LOINC term, presence of neutrophils in the serum was returned, and we were wanting neutrophil count, not the presence of, okay? And there is a little bit of a difference on, are we using segments or bands, and that one I can tolerate. But you can see that there's varying levels of overlap. You'll notice that we're getting cord blood and fetal blood, and cerebral spinal fluid return in some regards. So, some really odd uses of terms. So what did we learn? Okay. Odyssey did include things, for example, that involved urine appropriately, so creatinine, okay? For most things. Occasionally there were target analytes that should have been measured in blood for fitness for purpose, but there's a urine counterpart, but would not be germane to this type of study. So there was overlaps where it makes sense if you're working on a word string and not necessarily on this specifying your specimen types. There were coagulation measures that were returned by Odyssey that we obviously didn't include. And so there's a little difference between the 2 care guidelines as well. But in general, nice overlap, good thing to study. But look what we've started to find. Fetal blood, cord blood coming back as specimen types, which obviously I don't think any fetus, I hope not, is dealing with metastatic bladder cancer. Body fluid, CSF, urine, when urine really was not the target specimen for the type of thing we're measuring. So in one essence, the LOINC ontology can be used, in essence, to say either a pre-quality check for inclusion criteria, or in a scenario where we just give me everything, which data would really be more appropriate to consider for our study. That's one potential finding. But what really started to get interesting were the units of measure that were reported or not, highly variable, even within the same institution for the same test, and some nonsensical. In fact, we did get ALT measurements returned back in units of Tesla and newtons. Now that may be a new method I'm not aware of, and maybe it'll make lots of money. But you do see high levels of variation within even a single institution, let alone across ranges of value. So this would be, a litmus test for Christian and Asier. Are the results coming back, if they're in the right units? What does this range look like? Is this a reasonable range for the mean and standard deviation around the mean for a particular lab test? They were everywhere, to the point that I can't even remember, even on and I would say, generous alignment or a normalization that was allowed in the study. In other words, a percent overlap of, what was it, 60% or was it 30%? Didn't matter. It was around 50%. If your mean or your 3 standard deviations, your range, overlapped at least by 50% or more with what a textbook said, we'll look at your data. There were very few of those. So the range of data was not great. From my conclusion, and it's always scared me with OMOP studies, when it comes to lab, not other things, laboratory data is not ready yet for broad, reliable use in common data models. And I'd like to talk a little bit more about why. Okay, let's talk, I call it the elephant in the room. Even laboratorians, laboratory data, let's just say, varies, right? Some of my laboratorian friends would say a sodium is not a sodium is not always a sodium. The machine that is used to perform the test, the reagents that are used to perform the test, the time of day, not so much that, but everything starts to matter, right? Reagents do change. You run out of reagents in your lab, you reorder, the equipment needs to be recalibrated. That calibration will change. This is called normal variation in life, but our labs don't accommodate for that between labs. They can accommodate it within their own lab, but not between labs. The medical textbook does not necessarily reflect what's happening. I will take an example of D-dimer to measure clotting, if you would. The College of American Pathologists has massive amounts of data spanning 20 years on testing, sending controlled aliquots out to sites around the world, primarily the US, getting the results back and comparing. Well, there are 4 D-dimer devices, or devices that perform the D-dimer test that the CAP tracks, 3 of which are similar, with similar means and similar standard deviations around the mean for what the results and where coagulation or clotting is an issue. And there's an outlier that has a 10-fold difference in breakpoints. It's a validated instrument. It's very safe to use, but you sure would never put those 2 together, and they do use the same LOINC term, appropriately so. So things are important to understand, and frankly, most non-laboratorians do not understand this phenomena. And it's not poor performing laboratories. This is just how laboratories work. So I always call it the problem of the pachyderm, or that's what I say now. The elephant in the room is part of a bigger problem. Standards only describe a few things, what is being measured, and to some extent, how it's being measured. We're not carrying the units of measure. We're not talking about platforms, whether it's a European identifier or it's a UID published by the FDA, let alone necessarily the reagents that were used. Now, on a quality level, yeah, within a lab, we're tracking that. So if a lot goes bad and we know that something's wrong with our testing, we correct. But we're not sharing that across, enterprises. So we really don't know how one test may relate to another test. What do we get? We get data that we can't put in the same flow sheet row, we can't trend, it's hard to compare in a federated study or an aggregated study like this. And normal ranges aren't necessarily sufficient, right? The D-dimer example would be one. 3 of the instruments would look great and 1 instrument would look bad, but there's not clotting going on in either patient, or there is, right? So it makes you wonder, what the heck have we been doing for the last several years here with the LOINC work? Well, several things. One, this had to happen, and both standards are having their quality tested and improved. 2 minor examples: duplicate LOINC parts. That's a problem. This process has really helped us identify that, because now you have a 3rd set of eyes looking at it differently, and it's been fantastic. Some modeling changes in one system or the other, doesn't matter, but we've really gotten to that. I can tell you from looking at this, as we develop content for LOINC parts and what is its counterpart in SNOMED, finding that, oh, guys, we've been conflating, in the SNOMED side, both the synthetic and the natural variant or conflating 2 substances, one being synthetic, one being natural, and they're different. So somatotropin and somatropin. We conflated that. We've had to fix that. I forget us. Do you remember how many concepts we had to go back and correct on our side? It was it was 100 or so. It was a lot. So that's a good thing. The logical groupings help. Wonderful. It does reduce some of the mapping burdens. Quality checks like we've done here with the bladderware, that was great. We're starting to think, even what we've done, even with the variations, there is value to what we've done. We can now apply, for example, algorithms that would say, I want to look at the antimicrobial resistance patterns within my hospital. A patient presents, this is the organism, this is a susceptibility to a particular substance, right, carried by LOINC. Well, that substance, using the attribute in SNOMED that links the substance to the susceptibility, says, well, these are all beta-lactams. Okay, well, what beta-lactams are available to me in my hospital to apply, and which one is fit for purpose? So there are ways that we can start to use these data. Public health is also another one. I want to look at anything that's interesting in respiratory pathogen presentation, regardless of how you determine it. Great, good public health uses. But really we get down to, and this has always bothered me, we introduce variation into this process every time we touch the data, okay? We start in laboratory. If we don't encode accurately here and allow it to be passed to another system, somebody's interpreting what I've just sent. Now we're subject to their interpretation, for better or worse, potentially introducing variation. If it's not done well there, and in this case, I would argue that in some of the CDW, clinical data warehouse research, when we pass things, it's an informatician who may be looking at data but is not a subject matter expert to even know how we are amplifying or reducing information as we pass along, and we get these LOINC parts, if you would, being added to a data set to represent a particular analyte. So I argue that the best data is done when we do it at the point of creation, and that the people who create the data, right, in their system builds, participate in that binding, because they're subject matter experts, at least in terms of the medicine, working with terminologists or informaticians to make their native build in each of their systems fit for purpose, because then we don't have to touch the data again and introduce variation or create problems downstream. So implementation is a big deal, and knowledge transfer is a big deal. We all have responsibility. So what does this mean to us in the standards bodies? Well, we need to do a better job in terms of educating our users in discussing the implications of problems. But there's a lot of contributors here. What do the vendors of the devices, what's their responsibility? They developed the test. They should be telling us exactly what this test is, how it's performed. There are worries about IP protection. There's worries about, do I have to put this in my package insert? And if I put a code in my package insert, what's the legal ramification? What happens when we change? There's issues there. The LIS and EHR vendors do not spend much time, if any time, on the terminologic areas and the bindings of terminology. Here's how you structure the information in our system. If you want to put a term on it, you go to town, and here's the cell where you'd put bind it to your terminology. So that's an issue. When I'm talking to my pathologists and laboratorians, I said, this is your data. Earned your reputation using a microscope, so to speak. Well, data is your next microscope. So you need to make sure that these information objects that are leaving your laboratory mean exactly what they say to a computer as much as it is to the human who read it, because now you have two consumers, if you would. One has no soul, and the other one is trying to do the best they can. So, and we have an obligation, we've talked about that. So that's a rapid review. I really want to thank Christian and Asier for kind of giving me a peek under the tent, access to some of the data so we could do this analysis and hopefully, advance or facilitate or help improve the raw product, the raw material of the data that you use to conduct these studies, and that we get that feedback loop. But at this point, I think we're going to open it up to questions, comments, arguments, food fight, brawl, whatever you'd like. At this point in time, it's the end of the week, and there's beer waiting for people, I think. So, so we're going to open it up for questions, and that means not just me or Christian or Asier. That's to Jim, Stan, Suzanne. Questions? Okay.
So we really love listening to you tell us about all this, Scott. I guess just from the project side of thing, I would ask Asiye and Christian what your perspective was on the other side, seeing what Scott was doing, and then, what that means to you in terms of, moving forward or, potential future plans, et cetera. Any insights and perspectives?
I start and then I give it to this guy. So we are pretty much, so we've been doing a lot of work on making sure that we can actually generate evidence or generate output that are reliable. So getting away from the current reputation of observational research that is not trustable or trustworthy, and very, very specifically because the data stinks. So that's what we've been doing for the past couple of years, like working with all our data partners to make sure that, like, what do they have, right? We know what we want to answer. We have a series of use cases that we know potentially observational research can answer. But we can't just jump without knowing that whether we have the data, the quality and depth, and whether the quality is there, and then try to work with them and help them to get that level of quality before jumping to analysis. And we started doing that by looking at just cancer-specific concepts, whether it's defining the diagnosis or the treatment-related procedures or not. And then we got to this specific use case because guidelines are important, guideline adherence are important. And we cannot do that just focusing on cancer-specific concepts. We need to expand. So we need to know whether, like, we can identify whether the liver is good or the kidney is good. So hence the whole assessment of let's wait, because up until now, I've been trying to avoid using labs because it's complicated. What Scott shows, I've seen, and it gives me a lot of fear. Like, I don't know how to do with that, so let's not. Especially lack of range, what. So we thought the best way is that let's first take a look and see what's in the data. How are people using reporting and coding their data? And after that, once we have this assessment, we can actually have institution-specific reports and view of how bad or how good they are. Where are the areas that we have to talk to? We don't know what's happening. We don't know whether it's at the time of entry, whether it's during the ETL to OMOP, or we have no idea. But we can start this conversation, get their input, and then try to at least understand whether this potential project of ours can go, at least this part of it, can go to an end.
Yeah. I want to show a little empathy for the people who produce these data. It's a little bit like, and it came to my mind because I drove to the airport this morning for 3 hours, is speed checking. Okay, there are these nice little radar cameras, and they check your speed. So you go into a town or village, and you have to slow down to 50. And it doesn't matter how the speedometer works. It doesn't matter actually if it's 49 or 51. What they want is they want to catch the people who go with 100 kilometers per hour through the town. That's what it is, and they want to ding those people. So what they do is we know this, right? A little bit, you can be a little bit over. You can be a little bit over, and the thing is not gonna go off. 9 kilometers, 4 kilometers, it probably depends. Okay, something like that. This is the reality here too. So what our community here, expect them is to say the exact precise number, the exact precise method of measuring, okay, with the exact precise conditions, okay, all of this stuff, when it doesn't matter. They don't have that. So I was very, very happy to see that what you guys did, gentlemen showed us earlier, these categories. You had another name for the categories of tests?
Groupers, orderers.
What, there was a name, yeah. Anyway, the one that you said you can be ordered, but that should never come back. What comes back is a very ugly CSV file from some lab system, and it says exactly that. Sodium, 140 N. Why does it say N? Which then we call these people the poor ETL schmuck. They get some data, and then they have to interpret what the hell is N? And then what they do, they go into one of these mapping tools, which we also saw in the previous session. Well, N is Newton. I guess it's Newton. I don't know what it is. This is what the reality is. Of course, it's not Newton. They know that too, but they have no other way. This is what comes in from the clinical system. Obviously, it's milligram per deciliter. And there's a normal range is also provided. So what we want them to do is to say, all right, you need to do a little bit of a leap of faith here and bridge that gap. And, do something useful here. There should be a list of typical units. Can't be Newton, it can't be Tesla. All right, but it's millimole per decimeter, millimole per liter, millimole per milliliter. Half a dozen. Okay, pick the right one. We want you to do that, and forget about the method of how the sodium was measured, and in blood or in plasma, it doesn't matter. Okay, so what comes back is as crude as what the request is, because that's exactly what they're requesting, and this is all they come back. And there's never variety. For years and years and years, the same sodium with a unit of N comes back. So there's a false precision if we force them to constantly having to pinpoint details that are not relevant for the purpose of the particular measurement. So what does it mean? It means we need to have several levels, and apparently you guys have been working on it, which is wonderful, really, really wonderful. Several levels of precision at which are allowed, which can be reported, because that's all we want. We wouldn't have this craziness if there was there sodium in blood, or plasma, or serum, or whatever. Okay, but make sure it's not cerebrospinal fluid. That you have to make sure. So if instead of having 15 different categories of things that the poor ETL schmuck has to get right, there are only the 3 that are really important, then we can actually start working on the quality of the data. Because in reality, in the clinic, what happens is, it doesn't actually matter what's on the screen. It's all on the screen, it all comes back, it's all in Epic or whatever the EHR system is. And the doc or the nurse or whoever interprets the result, well, the pathological ones which are out of range are red, and the other ones are black. So they look at it, they know roughly what it should be. And if the sodium is at 200, we have a problem. Okay? If it's 134, is it 140, is it 144? Doesn't matter, does not matter. Okay? It's fine, it's still good. The guidelines, same thing. Okay? These cancer patients, they are sick. They all have the livers aren't good, the kidneys aren't good. But if the glomerular filtration rate is down by a factor of 10, then we may not want to give a compound which actually is very hostile to the liver. Okay, so let's get real with what precision means here. I mean, there are some tests which really have to be precise, but it's a very small minority. What's false precision and what's right precision? Number one. And then the other one is we have to give them an environment where it's clear what they need to focus on when they put this together, or when they set up the machines in the lab, same thing, because that's where the LOINC code comes from. Somebody has to type it into the machine in the lab. And what that person typed in for the next 5 years gets reported. Nothing else. Nobody goes ever back. So always the same. Okay. So it's this one LOINC code. Okay. Wrong or right, doesn't matter. It's always that one. So let's make sure that we have those codes that capture the important pieces of information. And if there's more detail, good. If it's not more detail, also good. Because then we can actually start telling them, hey guys, this is not good, you need to fix something, right? But if we tell them, oh, you have to also fix the method of measurement of sodium, I don't even know what that stuff is. Spectroscopy? Well, I don't know what that is. So that's what I'm trying to make a pledge for, to make it easier to understand where they're coming from, what's really required of them, and how we can make it easy for them, and not give up the very important and very rich body that we have at this point.
So Christian makes an interesting point that informaticists say all the time. Is my data fit for all the uses throughout its life cycle, right? So the fitness, what's required for observational research is going to be different than what's required for acute medical care. And, right, so how it's done in the lab, especially if you have two labs in your same health system, which we do, this result, this ALT is not equivalent to this ALT performed in my remote lab, right? But the patient's going to be, their data is recorded in the same electronic health record, treated by similar physicians, and they can't be compared. That's important. Might not be so important for research. So the point of the poor ETL schmuck, the problem is we leave it to the poor ETL schmuck to figure this out. What we should, my argument is that it should be done correctly in the lab. It should be the responsibility of the lab director and his or her team to ensure that that information is the most accurate possible to represent the test that's being performed on this device for this analyte, et cetera. And I was really pleased in a previous, at a CAP meeting, just before the LOINC meeting, where the informatics medical director for Henry Ford Hospital, they manage 8 hospitals, and I was poking the bear, trying to get him to tell me how they validate these codings. He actually makes his individual medical director sign off on this is the concept that is bound to this. Now that was great, because now you're taking responsibility to this, and that will pass all the way through, and we won't leave it to the poor ETL schmuck, because usually an IT guy going, how do I take data from Chronicles environment that's now been converted to an SQL environment, and now I have to convert to another environment and apply these standards versus the internal standard of my institution. So the better we are at helping our implementors implement, the creators of the data, the more we can rely on their data. Daniel's going to talk, so I'm going to keep talking because I don't want Daniel to talk, because I just want to see how patient Daniel is. No, I'm not done.
So keep trying. So this is a problem that has been created by interoperability. So to meet the care use case, as long as it's the same lab, the same calibrated in the same way, same machine that delivers, it still works. And whether that's what was the ALT value of, they would understand that. So it's only when you need to share this information that it becomes an issue, which I think is both kind of well known that this doesn't come for free. Depending on the type of measurement that has been performed, there is significant work with the laboratories, convincing them to invest in producing values that are comparable even between that doesn't come naturally if you're running a lab, to be able to share your data with someone, and now in Europe we're doing the thing where we're sharing lab data from the far north to the far south and so on. That doesn't come naturally unless it's being specifically asked for. So I think that this is kind of expected, given that there has been not sufficient requirements to produce interoperable, it also need to be like clinically comparable lab results. I think that's what we're seeing here.
Yeah, and I'm glad you say that, because when we get away from the clinic even 1 degree, and we start to think that this technology will fix everything, SNOMED will fix everything, LOINC will fix something, AI will fix something, and it won't. The root causes are still there. They're just different forms of Band-Aids, or not even Band-Aids, I would say analgesics to one's brain. We have to realize that there are problems, and we come to this and say, yes, SNOMED can help interoperability, but SNOMED doesn't make it interoperable. There's multiple functions, and so I think the more we're real with that and start to address the real issues, the closer we'll get to some useful decision and useful things. Rob.
22 people online that want to hear what you have to say.
Look out. So a couple of things. First, Daniel, I mean, yes, it's, well, you said it's due to interoperability, and that's kind of, I hope we don't phrase it that way in the future. It's interoperability is revealing something that we didn't necessarily see before. I think it does matter in that even inside one institution, this was mentioned at the LOINC conference, because we went through this before, where there was a discussion about the fact that it was revealed to me, I'm going to put it this way, that the lab's been lying to me about GFRs for years and how they're comparable even for a single patient across multiple periods of time when they change reagents and they change the tools that they use to measure it. So, and they didn't tell us. And so there's an element of this that goes deeper than just the fact that, you know, across Europe, we're going to start sharing these things, or across the United States, we're going to start sharing and comparing these things. So this is a problem, obviously, that's bigger than just the fact that we've got an easier way to interoperate and therefore see these kind of glaring problems. But I think the other thing that I wanted to say is not just lab, right? Because one of the things that hopefully we're going to talk about soon, you know, I mean, I don't mean today, but I mean in a future conference, is when we start doing more than lab, right? That the LOINC Ontology, and many of you have heard me talking about this because I've been pushing this. I really want this to go beyond lab. And there's a lot of drivers even now about the importance of shareability of documents, shareability of survey instruments, and social determinants of health, and obviously clinical stuff too. But I know some of that stuff is already, quote, being done or solved because folks are choosing a particular code system like SNOMED to do share some things, but some of these things are not. And that's why, you know, one of the great things about what we're trying to accomplish with the LOINC Ontology, and as discomforting the things that you're revealing are with regards to some of the variability that we see with lab. That's great. It's a revealing thing that I hope, like you had said, you know, if it gets pushed up to the C-suites and they start, you know, kind of caring. And I'll finish with something interesting about that. But the point is that there's, I think we need to press ahead, because I think it won't be as bad, for example, in some other areas, because there's going to be consistency. And the one last thing I wanted to say is one of the interesting things that I heard just down in the Expo is that because we're encoding, right? So bad stuff that you just described, problematic, but because we're encoding, now all of a sudden there's another player in the field that's actually pushing this much more aggressively, and that's that AI thing. And what I was told is that, you know, this desire that we've had, that we weren't really firing on all cylinders to get people to encode, is because there wasn't really a lot of people looking at it. Now the AI train has come in and said, open up the spigot. I want everything. And that's being recognized by the people who actually have money. And they're saying, look, I want AI. AI is fantastic. And you need to get all of your data clean. Well, they're not saying clean. That's the thing. They say, I want all your data. And what we need to do is say, it's going to be so much better. It's kind of what we saw at our keynote. It's going to be so much better, and it must be encoded for that AI to work. And it needs to be broadly encoded. So again, I just want to push that we get beyond LOINC. Don't let this kind of this reveal of how dirty the data is keep us from pressing aggressively ahead to the other things.
No, that's a good point. And I don't think we're not definitely saying that, just we have work to do.
I'm stealing from somebody else. This wonderful conversation. One thing that I would want to point out is an initiative that's going on directed at patient data quality in a different way, and that's called the PICI framework, Patient Information Quality Improvement framework, and you can look it up. There's a website. It's an open source activity, and what they're doing is creating sort of non-denominational tools that will look at data and give you a score of the quality of data that you have. So it could be data that's in your own system. It could be data that you're receiving from another system. It could be the data that you're sending out to the health department. But it's something you can use yourself, and it gives you an overall score. And the kind of things that it does is it says, well, is there any kind of standard code in here that says what this thing is? Are there units of measure, and are the units of measure appropriate for the thing that's being measured? It doesn't even worry right now about syntax in the message, whether it's a HL7 version 2 or FHIR or anything. It's kind of doing natural language processing to get the information out. But, and I won't go into all the details, but those quality things, they're in a library of things. So there's a thing that checks the units of measure, there's a thing that's checking for standard codes, and that library will continue to grow. But the virtue of that activity is what it does is not just give you a score, but it says, oh, do you realize that only 30% of your data has units of measure? And that gives the people who are in the lab or whoever is managing this, that gives them a target to say, well, let's work on improving that. So it gives them it gives them a way to know how to improve. And it's not punitive, so it's not the government saying, well, we're not going to pay you if you don't do this. We're not going to. The assumption in this is that people want to do the right thing, but it's really hard to do the right thing. And so I just mention that to people as one thing that I see as a really positive kind of activity going on, where you have this open source kind of community where you can find out what the quality of your data is, and they will give you non-punitive information about how you can improve and make it better. And I think that's a wonderful kind of activity.
I have a question, actually. Do the vendors of clinical lab systems, do they actually talk to you guys? And can't you tell them, okay, you have a machine that says, use spectroscopic methods for measuring this and use an ELISA for doing this. Here's the LOINC code. Put it in as a default. Why does somebody have to figure that out 5 steps removed later on?
I can answer that one real quick. Two reasons and 2 resources. One, the CDC tried to create in COVID what we call the LIVID file, LOINC for in vitro diagnostics, that said, this is the code you should use for this device with this specimen, and here's the coding for it. Limited to COVID, monkeypox, a few public health issues. But the vendor did not put it in. The vendors have been reticent to do anything because if they put a code and say, use this, and it goes in their package insert, right? So now it becomes an FDA or CER governed document. if that changes because the terminology has changed or something's changed, there's money that they're afraid of. So the SHIELD effort had been trying to expand on that in the FDA world in the US. Here are potentially the recommended concepts, but knowing that it's still not sufficient for patient interoperability data that way, but it could be helpful in things that you're trying to do, but it would be a start. And so that continues to be an effort. The CAP in the States, in North America, is talking about things that we can do to facilitate that. But
yeah, thank you very much for the presentation. One question, I screened the content of the LOINC SNOMED Ontology, and it's mostly lab values, but there are already some just diseases, presence, things in there. Can you estimate how usable that is at the moment? Is there still a lot of things about the presence of bacteria and viruses in LOINC that is not yet in the SNOMED Ontology? Or could we start to probe the LOINC SNOMED Ontology for these purposes?
I can answer briefly. I can tell you from, I'm from the University of Nebraska Medical Center. We are also the the health laboratory for the jurisdiction. So LOINC actually has been working pretty well in its native state for microbiology and in the combination of information models and the like. We are very close. If I'm not, well, I'm working on the part of the conversion, and so we're pretty darn close on a lot of our microbiology content moving into the LOINC ontology, because that is definitely something represented in LOINC. Working on antigens and antibodies to organisms, specific organisms, even as we this week. So I think the coverage is pretty good and is only going to get better. It may not be for a very, some of your more esoteric organisms might not necessarily be there because they're nowhere near the top 20,000, but many are, and many select agents are in there that I would call esoteric. Because there are public health issues, and the CDC, in the US anyway, pushes that pretty hard. It has to be LOINC encoded, and it has to be SNOMED encoded for the organism. And so.
Okay. I wanted to add a little bit to the question about vendors and them recommending appropriate LOINC codes. That actually is the entire rationale behind the LIVID project. And I just wanted to add that, the LIVID file that Scott's referring to was based around COVID, but the LIVID project is really about all laboratory data. And it's actually coming from the vendors because they also have a vested interest in having the laboratories do things in common and having data be interoperable. And LIVID project itself is still ongoing, under development, and it should be, when it's available, should hopefully, at least partly, help to answer your question about that.
Scott, do you just mind going to the next slide, please? Perfect. So, we've got 2 minutes left of the session. Really appreciate everyone kind of listening in on new ways that the ontology is sort of being tested and tried, and I think that will only continue. V3, like the third release of the ontology, is expected in March, and really, over the next, as Jim said, 1 or 2 releases, the goal is to finish the top 20K labs, and then, we start talking about also what Rob was bringing up. What are some of those other content areas that we need to, look at and invest some time in? A big piece of what we still want to be able to do, though, is see where we can apply the LOINC ontology in real-world scenarios. So, the individuals in this room, the more that we talk about this and see, are there use cases? How can we support? We're not anticipating that it's pick it up off the shelf and you use it yourself and we'll figure it out. We're interested in a dialogue, I would say. So if anything comes to mind, I think the loincsnomed.org website is a great resource to go for A, the release, B, some information, and as a feedback mechanism to get in touch with all of the team here. So, you saw us introduce the team at the beginning, and, reach out, continue the conversation, because it's only going to be as good as you feedback into it. Yeah, and I mean, I think as we go forward, we're really looking to broaden that community and see who we can bring in and actually get active participation in where this goes. So I think really there's no end to what we could possibly achieve with this. I'd like to thank all the presenters, all of the team that's been involved in developing this, and you for attending. So thanks so much.